everyone, it's Karen here. Welcome back, and I'm so glad you're here. I've got a video today that is all about using stencils. I love stencils. I find them easy to use. They're very versatile. And honestly, when my mojo is kind of gone on a holiday, I love to make backgrounds. I find that's one way to bring it back. And using the stencils is what I love to do the most, I think, if I'm just making a background. So I've got part one of this video for you today, and I hope you'll stick around to watch part two. So the first way to use it obviously is to add ink, but I think you have to consider what your background is going to be. So here I am showing you it on 3 different backgrounds. You could also do this on pattern paper, I just didn't put that in. And I'm just showing you here. I promise I'm not going to show you all this ink blending through the video. I left it for this. But you do want to make sure that when you're putting on your ink through a stencil, if you're using the brushes, just go back and forth in different directions, because you do want to get that ink into all those little corners where the stencil's got the openings. And just like regular ink blending, go back over your lines just to smooth out and blend the ink. I tend to leave one side of the stencil in place, and here it's the left side. And so there you can see on the white background, it's quite crisp and quite a bright background. So I'm doing exactly the same inks on this ink blended background, and you can see that's a little duller. It's the other colors do show through where the stencil was, but it is a different effect. And here it is on a blue colored cardstock. So once again, even less bright, I would say. So very different effect. So consider that when you're going to put a stencil on, you may want that effect. There's nothing wrong with any of them. I wish I had done it on pattern paper, because I think that would have been fun to show you as well, but I didn't. Okay, so the other thing to do with the ink is you can mask off parts of your card. Okay, now this mask I just did, it's horrible. And I wasn't really thinking about that. I was just ripping up a piece of paper for you, but this is just office paper, and I use this Elmer's Repositionable glue stick, which is exactly like Post-it note glue. So it's much less expensive than buying masking paper, and I just use this. It's very inexpensive. So I am just sticking down these masks, these horrible masks that I've made, and I'll put my stencil on over top of that. And again, just ink blending the same colors right through it. And once it's done, it's a very different effect. For a 1-layer card, this is kind of a fun way to do it. So when you pull off those masks, you've just already got a border created. So that's another quick, easy way for a 1-layer card. Now, sometimes stencils already have the borders in. So these are from CZ Designs, sold through Simon Says Stamp. And they've already masked off the outside part. So for an A2 card, they're perfect. Okay, so this one I think is a really useful technique where you just fade out the ink. So I'm starting with the heavy application there in the bottom, and I'm not re-inking anywhere up at the top. I just use what's left on the brush to lightly brush over those openings. And it just leaves such a pretty effect. Just be careful you don't go out past the stencil there on the side or the top. But I love that look. I think that's a really fun look. So that's an option. Now here I've already ink blended in the bottom corner there, and I'm going to use this stencil. I sort of angled it, and I'm using a different color now to do that same fading out look. So a little heavier on the bottom left corner there, and just fading out to nothing basically. So there's that. I have tried to list in the description box below all the supplies that I have used. I hope I've got them in there. It was a rather extensive list, I gotta say. Okay, so then you can overlap stencils or offset them, just slightly shift them. Here I've got a balloon stencil from Paper Rose, and I am just going to overlap these balloons on it to give it the look of them sort of being a bit translucent, and you know, just a cloud of stencils up above on the top of the card. So you can see I'm just overlapping that first little balloon there and just going over with a coordinating color of ink, I would say. All these colors you can sort of blend together. It's a bit of a rainbow. And I'm just lightly going over the ink blended area. Really, I should have put a bit more ink down on that, but you can see there where it does overlap, and it looks like the one balloon is in the front and the other in the back. So here I am just finishing up. Just make sure you wipe off your stencil. And I decided to put in cards for you because I personally like that to see how things end up. So this was that first ink background, and I've just put some flowers around a center focal point. Here is that awfully masked card, but it is easy to do. It was just add the sentiment and a little butterfly. This one also was super, super easy. The hearts kind of say it all, I thought, on that. And here it's just some flowers in the bottom left corner and a sentiment and a few little water drops. Another fairly easy card. Now for this one I did stencil onto the balloons. I added some Nouveau drops there and a bit more ink and hearts and stripes, and I've got those MFT birds at the bottom, and that's Simon Says stamp around the outside. Okay, so the second technique is to try some double stenciling. Here I've already got this Simon Says stamp waves die inked up with the inks I had up there, I forget what it was. And I've applied this second stencil over top. And I'm using a darker ink here on this one going all around, but I still have my first stencil in place below. So don't remove the stencil, the first one. And when you take it off, this is a lot like masking for stamping. Whatever was done first will be in the foreground and the second stenciling will be in the background. So you can see those fish look like they're behind those wavy lines. And here I've turned it into a card, so the fish, the stenciling really did it all. That was the background, and I just added a few borders in waves with some, I think that was embossing powder and a sparkly embossing powder and the shark. Okay, so landscape stencils are another fantastic option. If you're doing any kind of scene, there's so many. This is an MFT grass, there's mountains, there's trees, there's sky. For this particular stencil, I do find it easier. I turn this upside down, so that may look kind of weird to you guys, but I just find that easier to get that grassy look. So that's the grass. Now here, this is my absolute favorite stencil for making skies. It is from a Colorful Life Designs, and it's called the Cloud Edger Stencil, and I love using it with this Cosmic Shimmer Color Cloud ink, and the ink is in Clear Day color. It goes on differently. You can use a blending brush, but I just like this sponge. It took me a while to figure it out, but it really is easy. It's a very juicy ink that will fade back in color quite a bit. And when I use this stencil, I'm really thinking about keep the white, keep the white. And so all I do, it's like a flicking motion with your Copic markers. I am really just kind of flicking ink off the edges of that stencil, just not too far, just a little off, just to get a little bit of blue, which gives you that illusion of the cloud there. And it's such a nice stencil. You can add so many layers of clouds with this. So I do like that. And here it is turned into a little card, which was so easy. Just the Colorado Craft stamp. The sentiment is theirs, and the little bunnies. Okay, so layering stencils. I think we've probably all seen layering stencils being used. They are very easy. They're expensive. I got these ones because I made note cards for my mom and mother-in-law for Christmas. So I bought this whole set at great expense, but I bought it. And so I am trying to use it. I have foiled the image first, and I'm stenciling over it. Now, usually these stencils have a larger opening that you put the lighter color ink on first, and then a more concentrated ink to go in a smaller area of it. So here you can see all 4 layers of this stencil. And it is a very pretty stencil. This is it turned into a card. These are some of the note cards I gave to my mother and mother-in-law, and they're very, very pretty. Okay, a ghosting technique is where you color up your background, and I've done this in Broken China and Peacock Feathers, and you do quite a heavy application on the background. put the stencil over, and now this is a very wet baby wipe that I am going over the stencil with, and it removes some of the ink. So you may need to turn that baby wipe around, and that's the effect that you get, which is really quite pretty. And there it is, just turned into a card, so there isn't much more you have to do. I just did a little border of flowers and leaves and a sentiment. Now, reverse stenciling, I really like this. I am using the back of this stencil, and I'm putting on some festive berries and some rustic wilderness over the flowers and the leaves. I have to say I saw this done years ago on the internet, and I don't remember who did it, but this wasn't my idea. I saw this done ahead of time and love this. So I'm just spritzing a bit of water onto the back there just to activate that that ink. Now, I should have left this on longer, and I didn't. I got excited. I thought the water was going to be too wet, and I lifted it up. But you can see when you lift that, there is a bit of a line there where the ink was around the edges of the stencil, so you can barely see that, but there's a few flowers there. So I've let that dry, and I've cleaned off the stencil, and now I'm applying it right side down. And I'm just going to ink with the same colors of ink over those openings now. So festive berries and the rustic wilderness still, just going over the flowers and the rustic wilderness for the leaves here. And when you lift that, it's so, so pretty. Now the background I had done with worn lipstick and wild honey, and I'm just spattering on a bit of the festive berries and the wild honey, I think, there. So you can see that little bit of ghosting of the reverse stenciling there. And I thought, because I didn't do that very well, I would do a second example. So this, I think, is a Tim Holtz layering floral stencil, I think it's called, but I will list everything. And I'm just putting festive berries, old paper, and tea dye Distress Oxide inks on the back of the stencil. And I'm just doing it on a piece of scrap card. But then I'm going to spritz that with water again. And I missed a spot there, but just a few spritzes, maybe 2 or 3 spritzes. And then you want to put that onto your cardstock. Now, try to leave it a bit longer than I did with my first one. So this one I did leave longer. I'm putting it down, and I actually used my brayer on this just to really press that ink into the background a bit. I don't know that you have to do this. You could probably just press with your fingers. But I have my brayer there, and I thought I'd use it. So there you can see it's a very much a watercolor looking effect, I would say. It did dry back quite a bit. The color faded a bit as it dried. So here they are in cards. I didn't have to do anything to this other than emboss that sentiment, which is from the Greetery, and added a few little gold pearls. And this one I cut it into, I used a border die to cut the borders. Made that flower, it's from Creative Expressions, and a few leaves, and that's gold embossed sentiment. But you can see that one did dry back quite a bit. Okay, so you can use watercolor sprays. Now, this is an older stencil from Altenew. It's a layering dahlia. I can't remember what it's called, but I had put little Sharpie dots in the corner so I knew how it would line up. So that's what you see there. And I am just using Distress Oxide sprays over the first stencil, which is the more open one. And when you lift it, you can see it's pretty just like that, honestly. It's got a speckly look to it when you look at it close up, which was kind of fun, really. So I'm putting that second stencil on top, and I've got some masking tape underneath that's holding it down. And I'm just spritzing on slightly darker colors. I think I used picked raspberry, crackling campfire, spiced marmalade, and fossilized amber on this. And so when I pull this one off, it's just that much prettier with the second layer, really. It just added a bit more definition. Now for this particular one, I decided I would try putting some transfer gel on it. And so I'm just showing you here. I've got a dry brush, and I am just brushing on and sort of flicking brush stroke marks on because I decided to foil this. I don't know if that was a mistake or not. You can tell me what you think. But I'm just brushing lightly. And so then you can see all those little brush marks on there. Okay, so the other way to use your watercolor sprays is these Pixie Sparkle. Okay, this gets confusing. I'm using Cosmic Shimmer Pixie Sparkle powders, and I have sprayed my stencil with Pixie spray, which is very different. It is a slight tacky glue that is perfect on stencils, and for something like this, I would definitely use something like that because it holds the whole back of the stencil down so that watercolor cannot seep underneath it. And I really do love it. I try to use it for when I really need it, otherwise I'll use the masking tape. But I've got a piece of watercolor card there that I've got wet on the back and wet on the front so it doesn't curl. And I'm just tapping on these Pixie Sparkle powders from Cosmic Shimmer. You could use Nouveau shimmering powders, Brusho, all of those will be the same. But I love the Cosmic Shimmer one. It's got a really nice mica in it. And then I spritzed it with water to activate the powders. And you just want to be sure all the powder is a little wet and activated. And then I'm just removing some areas where there was a bit too much water because you don't want it to go under that stencil. So it's just a few spritzes to activate the powder. And let it sit for a minute or two so it just really takes on that shape of the stencil. And then when you peel it off, well, you can see some of that sparkle there. It's really quite pretty. But that stencil is still full of that powder. So all I did is I spritzed it again 2 or 3 times, and I'm putting it on a piece of cardstock upside down. So the Pixie spray side, the tacky side is up. So you'll see it just lifts off for me in a minute here. Just press it down and pull it up, and it's almost as good as the first one, quite honestly. So there's the positive and the negative, and you can see they're fairly close in intensity of color, and I just set those aside to dry. So here they are as cards. There is this one foiled up. I don't know if that was a mistake or not. I'm not sure, but it was pretty easy. So that one is done. And then for the Pixie Sparkles one, well, it was an oceany looking one, so I have turned that into a bridge style card, and I have made some laminated waves there with my laminator, and I've put some fish in there and a shark and just added a few little things onto it. So there you have that one. And I do have a video on making those laminated waves, so if you want there, it'll be in my playlist there. Okay, so that's part 1 of all these cards, of how to use the stencils and turning them into cards. I hope that's been helpful, and I really hope you'll come join me for part 2 because I think it gets better. So thanks for joining me. See you next time.